From a long career at Microsoft to chairman of the LA Clippers, Steve Ballmer's story is far from complete. It began more than 40 years ago when he was hired by college buddy Bill Gates to become Microsoft's 30th employee. Together, they laid the groundwork for the technological revolution that has completely changed our way of life. Since stepping down as that company's CEO, Ballmer has taken his talents to Los Angeles, where he hopes to build a championship organization in the NBA. In this episode of Influencers, Steve Ballmer joins me as we discuss this latest phase of his life and how technology has helped to cushion the blow of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Influencers. I'm Andy Serwer, and welcome to our guest, Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, founder of USAFacts, and former CEO of Microsoft. Steve, good to see you.
Pleasure, Andy. Thanks very much for having me. It's an honor.
Well, thank you. And so you're all good, sheltering in place. How are things going during this coronavirus for you, Steve?
I'd say very fortunate in two regards. One, our family is safe and healthy. My friends have been safe and healthy. One young person we know who was afflicted and one older person, but everybody's fine. So that's good. And since we've been fortunate financially, we're not dealing with many of the terrible issues that folks are dealing with.
So how have you reshifted the focus of some of your endeavors during the coronavirus and maybe looking to address the disease or its impact on our society and economy?
Yeah, I would say probably in a couple or three ways. USAFacts is this organization we started to focus in on government data. And we've been doing that, combining state, local, and federal information on the premise that it's just very hard to see a consolidated look at our government, where the money comes from, where it goes, and the outcomes. That's not just true for citizens. I think it's also true for government decision makers. And we took that resource and really focused in first on the disease in terms of government data. We only use government data, pulling it together, and now on data in the recovery. And you could say, okay, well, that's easy. No, that's not easy. We've written software that literally has to go pull county health data together to understand what's going on county by county by county in terms of the virus. And our data is good enough. The CDC uses it and points to it on their website. The President's Coronavirus Task Force has chosen to use it, and it points out the need for decision makers to have broad national integrated data, just the way a business person would to run. So that's one thing. Our philanthropic activities, we focus on kids and families in need in the United States. And while we normally focus in on things for the future and opportunity, we try to really jump in and support emergency relief efforts, whether it's food, housing. The not-for-profit industry has been one of the hardest hit and maybe one of the least well-served by the PPP programs. So we've tried to jump in there in a number of different ways, deploying both grants and we're about 40 million in now in grants and an additional 35 million in capital to try to put up money so that businesses would have more businesses, not-for-profits would have more loan resources against which to pursue PPP. And then lastly, we are an employer. We have good fortune, so we have kept all of our employees employed. That's, I think, a very important thing that we are fortunate to be able to do, including at the Clippers, where we haven't exactly had a lot of action. And I recently bought the LA Forum, which is now a concert venue. And we've kept, despite the fact it could be a long time before we're doing concerts again, at least other than drive-ins, we've kept that staff intact.
All right, there's a lot to sort of drill down to into those various different buckets that you just discussed, but I want to ask you about the macro picture here in the United States. Obviously, the pandemic hit and there's been a response, and you've seen different levels of response, different types of responses, and then reaction to that at the federal level and at the state level. State level is interesting. Your state, Washington State, with Governor Inslee, has sort of gone in one direction. Federal government's gone the other direction. What path has made the most sense to you, Steve?
Well, all of these things essentially are judgments, tough judgments, between death and misery, I'm afraid. Misery when people lose jobs and are hard hit financially, and death obviously from the disease. And it'll be a constant thing that people have to look out for. And reasonable people can make different choices. Obviously, from USAFacts perspective, we hope they make them well informed with the numbers. What really happened, and do they need to change course? And those judgments will continue. We don't know whether we'll get a second wave of the disease. I went back into Seattle, and I hope opening up the economy really means what the health officials say, still with social distancing, still with masks. But I think people are going back, if you will, totally to their old lives. At least that's the way it looked when I was home in the city yesterday. And I think it'll be very important to continue to assess in a real-time way. It's a funny thing. The states are responsible for many things from a health perspective and local management, which that's our Constitution, perfectly fine. The states are supposed to keep their budgets balanced. But when you look at it in times of crisis, it's an integrated system. The federal, the local, and the state governments, you can't look at them as all separate, which was one of our fundamental promises with USAFacts. What will happen with the economy? I've been surprised to date about the strength of the stock market. That's counterintuitive, I'll say, from my perspective. It represents an optimism about the speed of recovery that surprises me. I am not an economist. I won't pretend to be an economist. We only report the past. We don't forecast the future. But depending upon the direction of the disease, we're borrowing a lot of money. We're spending $2 trillion. That's 45% of all tax revenue the government raised last year, in addition to all the federal government, in addition to all of the other expenses it bears. And we still have situations where universities, K through 12 organizations, and the state governments support them look in trouble. So I have reticence about thinking about anything other than what do they like to call it now, U-shaped recovery. It's hard for me to see any V-shapes in our future.
Is there anything else that you can pull out of the USAFacts data that is intriguing or surprises you or is illuminating?
Well, yeah, I'll say three things. Number one, now that we need local data, we'd focus first on nationally collected data. It is very hard to get. So making these decisions, let me just give you an example. They're talking about how to distribute data or money to the states. Well, how do you do that? Do you really understand enough about the comparative finances as opposed to this state spends like crazy and this state doesn't? The federal government's going to need to make that decision. And again, reasonable people can disagree, but are people really going to look at the same numbers to dig in? Are those numbers consolidated? Even when you get down to the local level, what's going on in this metro area or county? What's going on here? So the lack of data, I can't say shocks me, but it continues to surprise me. That's one. No business would do this. Right. Second thing is, what really do things look like in this recovery? I mentioned, state finances, but you can say, what's going on with prices? The overall consumer price index is down slightly. And yet, if you look at the staples, the things people really need, what's going on with eggs and bread and food prices, we've had the single biggest month-over-month increases in many, many years. An area of focus, because that's where the rubber meets the road right now, which frankly surprised me. I did not expect to see that kind of buoyancy. I guess it makes sense in a world of supply and demand, but it didn't really strike this citizen as we were thinking about the crisis. If you look at the distribution of the so-called PPP dollars, Paycheck Protection Program, I was surprised to see that North Dakota is #1 in the country, dollars per capita for PPP. I was surprised to see that Texas was the biggest total recipient of PPP dollars because it doesn't have the biggest population. So how we think about this stuff is the banking system, which was chartered essentially for delivering this program, is it working the way decision makers wanted it to work? Dive in, buy the data, take a look. And there's a few surprises, if you will.
Let's talk about the tech sector a little bit, Steve, and your old company, Microsoft, along with the FANGs, are certainly performing well during this time. Does that surprise you? And is it a case maybe where they're actually garnering too much market power given how well they're faring?
Well, in answer to the first question, it does not surprise me. Many of the things that are going on now, we and others, me when I was at Microsoft, we've been talking about for years. We've been talking about virtual meetings. We've talked about remote working. We've talked about digital everything. And all of that now is seeing an acceleration, starting with the virtual meeting scenarios and what it means to run a business that can without that physical connection. And I talked to Satya Nadella, who runs Microsoft. He has a nice way of framing. I'm sitting there myself thinking, wow, this should drive everything to digital. I'll just give you an example. In the communities we serve philanthropically, there are many people who are unbanked. If you are unbanked, how do you get your check? This one-time nice check from the government. It turns out that's a real difficult problem. If you're not filing taxes, if you're paper-based in terms of your financial records, all of these things are complicated. And I'm thinking this is going to accelerate. I talked to Nadella at Microsoft, and what does he say? They have a concept that they encapsulate now in these words, digital everything, which is kind of the modern day equivalent of themes that Microsoft and the rest of the tech industry has banged on, but I think that'll speed up. Government services that are hard to access electronically, those things will move. Education. I have a college-age son who is a term abroad, and he was sitting here in Whidbey Island, Washington, taking a class at the University of New South Wales for credit at the University of Michigan. And some of the classes have worked out very well online, others haven't. But education, healthcare, we've been talking about telehealth, but it's been something for other people. That's accelerating. So this notion of digital everything is an enabler for tech companies to add more value, which is fantastic. Do I think tech companies have more market power? I don't think it changes the market power dynamics and the competitiveness. It just makes the tech industry more important. And I would say that was an inevitable thing. I think being in the software business that I was running, and still a business in which I keep a very dear and important financial stake, I think it's a great business. And it will benefit at the expense of some other businesses. Will commercial real estate ever be as good a business as it's been in the past? Well, with virtual working, it's possible we will have smaller workspaces. What will happen with commuting and cars and investments that people are making now in new forms of mass transit? Some things could do better, some things could do worse. So you can kind of run through things in various industries. The tech sector will benefit. There's just no question about that.
Are you surprised that we're sitting here, Steve, using Skype, which you helped buy when you were CEO of Microsoft, right? I mean, did you ever envision it was going to be used this way?
Well, no. No, if you'd asked me when we bought the thing, I think we made our bid in 2011. If we would actually do interviews this way, I thought about working, I thought about people communicating with one another, but the quality of the video and everything else has gotten so good, and our inability to do this any other way. But here's the big question back to you, Andy. Will we do these kinds of interviews these ways after things are safer from a health perspective? My bet is yes. Do I want to fly to New York for a press interview? No, we can do that in a convenient way that people have built faith in from a quality of experience standpoint. So I have historically had to drive down to downtown Seattle, park, blah, 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 or Uber, just to be in a studio to do an interview. No, Skype's working just fine for the two of us.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there was reluctance by both parties, I think, to do this kind of thing. And I think we realized that, boy, there's a lot to be gained. It's a lot easier for you. And then from our standpoint, it's a lot easier to get people who might have been reluctant to go to that studio and blah, 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 like you said. Hey, let me ask you, what do you think of Satya Nadella?
I think his record speaks for itself. He's done a great job propelling the company forward. I'm excited for him. I got to say, I feel a little warmth in my heart for me too. One of the things I had always said was the greatest contribution, the thing that would make me proudest of Microsoft if the company went on to higher heights after I was gone. And I think it's fair to say the company has, from a profit standpoint, industry importance, back to #1 in terms of market cap in the world. So I think in many ways, financial and product innovation, the company has really moved forward very, very nicely. And I'm also kind of proud of the guy. It's always nice when you can have an internal successor. I had the privilege of working with Satya for about 24 years before he took over the role. And man, this guy's great.
A little bit more about the tech business. And right now, they've been under fire from Washington for a while, and you're sort of familiar with that process, being in the crosshairs. And right now, the president is mad at Twitter, and he's mad at the social media platforms, which I guess basically means Twitter, Facebook, and maybe YouTube as well. Although I guess he could include LinkedIn, but so far they've avoided it to a great degree, which is owned by Microsoft. What's your take on that tension between the president and tech?
I'll use the president specifically. And I say this in a nonpartisan way. It's very important from a USAFacts perspective. Reasonable people are talking today about what freedom of speech looks like on the internet. That has come in other forms, the Russian hacking, and how much free speech do you have, and how much responsibility / authority do the social media companies have to comment? I could tell you right now, I could post certainly on Twitter, there is an earthquake going on in Seattle, Washington. Am I entitled to say that? I don't know, but I can. And it would take a lot of artificial intelligence for the social media platforms to comment about my little tweet's veracity. Should they? I think a lot of people are saying right now they should have better technology to do that. So then when others speak, whether it's the president or some other person in authority, how do you want to speak to that if somebody says, or thinks that has the same quality of truth that my saying there's an earthquake? And I'm not trying to equate the two. And in many cases, reasonable people will be able to disagree, not about whether there's an earthquake right now. So I don't think it is outside the bounds of what responsibility for accuracy. Should I be able to speak freely, even if I don't speak accurately? Should the president, should the speaker, whoever you take, should I be able to speak unfettered? Should the bad guys then also be able to speak unfettered? Should the social media platforms have to decide who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? What's the regulatory environment going to look like? I think that's got to be worked through by government with the industry, because the industry can describe what's possible. Government needs to speak for the will of the people, if you will. And the way this one came about is interesting, but it ties to the same themes, even if it's a verified person.
I mean, it sounds like you're not sure what the solution is. And to be fair to you, Steve, you're not alone, but it's not easy, right?
Oh, but I tell you, I think it's easier than people think. This is a wild thing. Why do I say that? If there can be some kind of negotiation, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, if there can be a negotiation between the industry and the government, I think it's better done that way than through legislation. It's better to be worked through by the regulators with the industry, because then you can take on nuance. And the industry can explain what's possible, and the government can push the industry to innovate in certain ways. Things will get better. The artificial intelligence approaches will be applied to specific problems. This is not going to go away overnight, but it is my opinion that right now, the innovation is not being applied in as perfect a way as it could if there was a more clear target. I seem to be switching gears, but I'll say it this way. There is innovation right now in the pharma industry is all targeted clearly on corona. There is a clear priority. That helps focus innovation. And if there were clear priorities in terms of privacy and appropriate expression, I think the social media companies will innovate in a way that will really improve the situation quickly.
Yeah, and I think I remember you told me that if you had one regret during your time, that you would have been at Microsoft more proactive in terms of engaging the government during your process, right?
Right. I mean, I think we felt, Bill Gates felt that, hey, we've done nothing wrong. We should be left alone. And the truth is, I still would say we did nothing wrong, and yet we should engage with government over the legitimate interests of society. And I think there's a situation like that, even if you say, hey, look, we should be able to do what we did because it is lawful. Right. I think there's a similar issue here.
Steve, I was shocked to read, you grew up in the Detroit area, that you were a shy kid.
That's right.
How is that possible? I mean, you're sort of the opposite of a shy person now. How is the narrative arc of your life, briefly, speak to that transformation of your character?
Well, I'd say my pattern was shy until I got comfortable with people, and then less shy. That had been a pattern when I was a younger kid, but new environments, shy. And I'd say I still have some of that in new environments. You know, my first day meeting our basketball team, I had nerves, a lot of nerves. But the transformative time for me came in college and in business school. And I'll just give you a short anecdote. I was a football team manager, and I was picked to be the head manager for my junior year in college. And one of the jobs of the manager is to get up in front of 100 football players. You know, the manager's not the most respected position, and you have to get up, listen up a moment, and then make announcements on behalf of the coach. I got comfortable doing that. That was the first comfort for me. I got to business school. And I remember the first time I spoke in class, I had this piece of knowledge about LIFO accounting versus FIFO because it had impacted the price of Folgers coffee when I was at Procter & Gamble. And my voice was almost cracking. But then again, the experience in business school got me ready for where I was going. And I'd say certainly now there are not that many situations in which I'm shy.
And final question, Steve. This program's called The Influencers, and I'm wondering how you see using your influence on the world.
Well, for me, I'd say the two most important ways. Number one, the USAFacts project that we're working on, getting governments to use data, getting voters and citizens to respect data about what has happened. You can't disagree about what's happened. There are numbers. They are produced by the government. If this was a business, that's the basis on which you would publish information to your shareholders. You'd make decisions. I think there's room really to drive an important change in government and in the citizenry. There are plenty of quotes from Madison, from Moynihan about everybody's sort of got to be educated about the facts to have a democracy. And there is some movement in the government with things like the Data Act to make improvements in this area. Number two, at this stage, through our philanthropy, I hope we can make a difference not only in the lives of individual children, but also improving policy, whether it's in the criminal justice space, the juvenile justice space, funding for universal early childhood education. There are a set of things in which I think it's important to make progress that we are excited about. Now, with that said, if you really ask me, where will my biggest influence be? Well, it was in in growing Microsoft from a small seed. Bill and Paul started the company. I joined when there were 30 people and $2.5 million of revenue. When I left, I don't know, revenue was 80 million and 25 plus billion of pre-tax operating profit. But more importantly, we kind of invented the PC and popularized and democratized computing. And so I can live with the fact that that may be the biggest influence I ever have, but I get to keep trying in ways that I also think are important, and I'm excited about that. I can't say it falls in the influence category, but I'd also like to prove that the underdog can really win basketball champions. We have been historically not the most respected franchise in the NBA. We played in the shadow of another team in Los Angeles that's done very well. And as an influencer, if you will, be able to establish the story of the underdog once again, having all the potential in the world, that for me would be exciting. I just don't think it goes on quite the same list as the others.
This week, I got a chance to catch up with Steve about the return of the NBA and the Black Lives Matter protests. Let me shift gears, Steve, a little bit and ask you about the Clippers, which you mentioned. What's going on right now with the season? There's obviously a lot of topics in the air right now with the NBA and the players. Where do things stand with the season?
Yeah, there's a plan to reopen the season in Orlando, Florida. No fans, and if you will, sort of a contained environment to maximize the health factors for the players and staff who are there. The goal is to be safer than almost any other environment a player could put themselves in. So safer than the world at large. That's the goal, with lots of testing and other appropriate quarantining and masks. And we're working hard. The league is working hard on that, and hopefully that part works out. Obviously, there's also the issues of racial injustice that are so much in the news right now, and the league and the NBA Players Association are also in discussions about how to elevate those, to focus on those, and not take our players away from the voices they can have, but to allow them to have maybe even more voice through restarting the season.
And I'm sure you've spoken with the players and the coaches, and where do they stand on all this? Do they want to go back, and they want to be a part of the conversation as well, right?
Yeah, I think each guy is evaluated, and we encourage each of our guys to process this, if you will, individually. Individually, they have to decide, are the health factors acceptable to them and their families? The personal living situation, because there's a long time away from loved ones. Does that work for them? Does the opportunity to participate in the protests and the racial justice movement that's going on right now, does it all fit? And we respect and honor, and we told our players we respect and honor them figuring that out, and we'll support them in the decisions they make.
Let me also ask you about venues. You talked about not having live audiences and with concerts, and what do you do there? You got this thing now, but so what are you going to do with it?
Well, it turns out first step probably is to see if we can reopen with some kind of drive-in concerts where people are in their car. We're certainly looking at that. We look with some curiosity in terms of what's going on, what will go on and is going on at movie theaters. There's no plan with the public health authorities that would allow us to think about any kind of reopening in the near term. But we're studying what goes on in other kinds of environments, working with the county health department in LA, and we'll probably try, as I said, some drive-in events to get started.
You've been watching Influencers. I'm Andy Serwer. We'll see you next time.
Bill Gates made his name and fortune at Microsoft, but over more than 25 years in philanthropy, he became a leader in the worldwide fight against disease. Then the pandemic hit. Ever since, he has worked at the center of the global response, coordinating solutions with health officials and drug developers, and donating more than $350 million with his wife Melinda through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Since it launched in 2000, the foundation has donated more than $50 billion to reducing poverty, advancing medical research, and expanding access to life-saving drugs. In this episode of Influencers, Bill Gates is here to talk about how long it will take to contain the virus and what it means for the economic recovery and whether life will ever get back to normal. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Serwer, and welcome to Influencers, and welcome to our guest, Bill Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and co-founder and former CEO of Microsoft. Bill, great to see you.
Great to talk with you.
So it's been about 4 months now, Bill, since coronavirus was widely recognized as spreading throughout the United States. We're still seeing cases increase in half of the states here. How would you assess where we are right now fighting the coronavirus?
Well, this has been a huge tragedy. The health costs, the economic costs are, so gigantic, hundreds of thousands of lives, trillions of dollars. And so we need to stop this thing. We need to stop it in the United States. We need to stop it globally. The only positive thing out of this is that the pace of innovation, the way our foundation is working with the private sector to create therapeutics and vaccines, that's moving at record speed. And that's what gives us hope that we can get the death rate down with better therapeutics. Even by the end of the year, many new therapeutics will be out. And then during 2021, we should be able to manufacture a lot of vaccines, and that vaccine, key goal is to stop the transmission, to get the immunity levels up so that you get almost no infection going on whatsoever.
Yeah, you predicted recently that this current surge in the coronavirus will drive up the death rate. How bad do you think things will get, and when do you think that would turn around?
Our peak death rate was well over 2,000 a day. The doctors have learned to use the ventilator less, to use oxygen earlier. You have remdesivir, that's an antiviral from Gilead. We're trying to get that to be reformulated so it's even easier to use. You have dexamethasone, which is an immune system modulator that a study we funded in the UK has shown. So there's the risk of death has gone down almost a factor of 2 because of these treatment understandings. But as we get into the fall and people are more indoors, if we haven't cut the infection going into that, we could get back up to that 2,000 a day.
You've said that serious mistakes were made in handling this virus, this pandemic here in the United States. What was the biggest mistake?
Well, even today, people talk about the testing number, but people should know how incompetent it is that we reimburse for a test where you don't get the results within 24 hours. You need to prioritize the tests so that you're getting the results back. You shouldn't reimburse at all for a delayed test. So the U.S. is more blind to who should be quarantining themselves than any country in the world. And it's ironic because we have more of these PCR machines, we spend more money on them, and yet because the CDC wasn't allowed to prioritize who gets tested, and the states have a hard time doing that, we are allowing the majority of tests to be essentially wasted. That delay, where they made it harder for the commercial providers to get their tests approved, they didn't let them do the testing, they didn't do community testing, those March mistakes led to that first gigantic problem that we had. And in contrast, people like South Korea got to the commercial test providers and were able to have a very modest epidemic.
If you were in charge right now, Bill, maybe even the President of the United States, what would you do?
Well, trying to denigrate Dr. Fauci probably isn't the best approach. You want the experts to get the airtime, let them talk about, what drug trials have worked, which ones haven't. Don't, mislead people on those things. And, the US CDC is a very capable organization, the best in the world. Dr. Fauci and I talk on a regular basis about this innovation pipeline and how our foundation and NIH are funding both the first wave of vaccines and then a second wave of vaccines. And so the capacity to do this right exists in the country. You just build a website, put the CDC's name on it, and it will prioritize who should get tested. You get the message about masks to be a, kind of bipartisan, let's protect other people type message. And then you engage in the complex discussion about which things it's beneficial to reopen, like, perhaps kids under 15, whereas, schools for older kids in communities with lots of infection, sadly, you probably aren't going to be able to do in person.
You mentioned masks. Should masks be nationally mandated, Bill?
Well, the downside to wearing a mask is so low that, I can't understand why, it's even a controversy at all. The mask is cheap, it's easy to wear, it has no negative effects. If you're going outside your house, you put on a mask because you'll end up getting close to people. And we know this is not a coughing disease, just talking can expel the virus.
Do you think about things like the bills in Congress in terms of the relief, the stimulus package? Or is that kind of the stuff that you weigh in on, or have you thought about how that should go?
Well, the expertise of our foundation is more around the disease tools themselves. And so, yes, there are elements of these supplemental allocations that are very, very important to us, how we fund the therapeutics and the vaccines, including not just for the United States. We're trying to get 1% of the bill that's under discussion now to go to buy vaccines for the developing countries, because not only would that save lives and have this great humanitarian and strategic benefit in terms of U.S. leadership, it's also the only thing that will stop the disease from coming back to our country. And so the idea that 1%, shows that the U.S. cares. Yes, we funded a lot of R&D, but we haven't funded the procurement for these poor countries, which historically in every global health thing, whether it's smallpox or polio or HIV or Ebola, the U.S. is there not just in a selfish way, funding its own factories, but also helping out the entire world. And so that's a very compelling case. And so I am every day talking to people in government, people at drug companies, trying to make sure that we get money for the entire world.
Let's drill down to that a little bit. I mean, how would you prioritize then who gets the vaccine? And let's just say you've got Moderna over here. We were talking about J&J. If we're lucky, there'll be a couple of them, maybe 8 months, 9 months from now. Do you prioritize things in the United States by risk group? And then how do you disseminate globally, Bill?
Well, the only solution to this constrained supply is to have massive manufacturing capability. I mean, if you're going to vaccinate 80% of the planet with 2 doses that may be necessary, that's over 10 billion doses of a vaccine. And to make that even in, say in a year, that would be 20 times more than any vaccine production ever. And so what we're looking at is no matter who invents the vaccine, say AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson, where there are other factories around the world that could be brought up to speed to make that. So, get factories in India, factories in Europe, not just the ones that the US has been involved with that are in the United States. And so the companies that are doing this, with the global mindset and who say, okay, we're not trying to profit on this, they're engaging with us on this whole production plan. Even so, you will have shortages, but we're able to fund those factories at risk because we can move very, very quickly. And so that I feel good that those plans are coming into place. We'll want to go for health workers first. Anybody who has to mix around people who work at nursing homes. The vaccine has 2 good things. One is it should prevent transmission, and the other is it should prevent you from getting sick. And understanding exactly how well any of these vaccine constructs do that, that's what we're trialing. The first vaccine that gets approved may only be 50% effective. And so we'll still need to go, we need eventually to get one that's cheap, high volume, and about 90% effective.
Should the pharma companies be able to profit off of this, Bill?
Well, if you've taken money from, U.S. BARDA or others, hopefully they put terms in those contracts so that the pricing is reasonable. There are 1 or 2 companies that have, like Pfizer, who've chosen to fund it themselves. And so they put out the R&D and they did a purchase option for the U.S. So it's a little different in that case. Definitely for the poorest countries in the world, always for medicines, they should get just the marginal cost of manufacture, no matter whose it is. So in the case of the developing countries, nobody should try and make money. That would make pharma look really bad. I'm hoping that the great innovative skills that pharma's showing here, that they behave in a way that their reputation is better after the pandemic than it is going in.
Bill, for those people who don't know, could you explain a little bit about exactly how the foundation has been working to fight coronavirus?
Yeah, so a lot of the expertise on how you deal with infectious disease that is not in the private sector is at our foundation, because malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, these huge killers that are only modestly in the rich countries now, but are still a main reason why people die in the developing countries. That's our regular activity. And so, understanding vaccine costs and factories and trials, is our deep expertise. And we spend billions of dollars a year working on these new tools. When this respiratory disease caused by coronavirus came along, we shifted our activities to focus on this because it's hurting the health systems everywhere, and so we're working on therapeutics, we're working on the vaccines. It's because we're not going to use the marketplace here. It's an imperative to accelerate this research, even not based on how much money people are going to make. Our ability to evaluate which vaccine looks promising and tell countries, okay, please fund this factory. We're kind of in a central role in terms of the depth that we understand the biology and these new tools.
Have you ever given any thought to the fact that you're the person, maybe one of the people, but certainly a key person who recognized early on the power of the PC and the PC revolution, and you're also one of the people who recognized how devastating these pandemics could be? Have you ever thought about that? And is there any connection between those two massive epiphanies, perhaps?
Well, my career has been about innovation, and Melinda and I picked global health as the biggest single thing the foundation works on, and that gave me the exposure to say, wow, respiratory diseases, human-to-human transmitted, when people are traveling around so much, could be worse than 100 years ago when we had the big flu pandemic. So I spoke out about that. I wish I had been wrong. This is nothing but bad. This is not like I told you so type thing, because we could have taken the warning from myself and other health experts and been better prepared and avoided 90% of this damage. So the only good thing here is that we will prepare for the next one. That is the ability to scale up diagnostics and therapeutics and vaccines. We will get that right. And the science, which is what always draws me in, whether it's computer software or biology, the science is improving so quickly that by backing the right teams, being willing to take risk, we will come out with a set of tools to make sure this doesn't happen again.
You're so engaged. I mean, did you ever think about becoming a scientist or a doctor when you were younger?
Well, I love all of science. And in my Microsoft days, I was so engaged in running Microsoft that I didn't get to stay up to date on what was going on with genetics or a lot of the other sciences. Since I retired in 2008, I've been able to look broadly, and of course the foundation work gives me access to some incredibly bright people and teams that we come back who are doing just phenomenal work with the goal of saving lives. So I've gotten to have two super interesting careers that are 80% alike in terms of working with innovators and looking out into the future in terms of what can have a dramatic impact.
You mentioned talking to all kinds of high-profile people, great minds, et cetera. I know you talked to Warren Buffett a fair amount. What do you guys talk about when it comes to COVID-19 and the current situation, Bill?
Yeah, actually, Warren and I are talking on a more regular basis than ever because the policy issues, the economic issues, what this means for various companies. Just talking with Warren about, okay, furniture sales are actually at a record high, but, railroad shipments are 20% below their peak. The economic situation overall it's pretty tough, but it's complex to say, okay, which kind of businesses will survive? Why is the stock market, at the level that it's at? Why are interest rates where they are? And so Warren and I find the world fascinating, and there's, a lot going on that we're trying to puzzle out. Okay, what can we do to help, or where is this headed?
He told me in March, Bill, that you said to him that you were not sure that the summer would make this virus go away. And you were right, it seems. Why did you think that?
Well, the U.S. opened up while infection rates were still going up. The summer is helpful. High temperature reduces force of infection. People spend more time outdoors. The fall, if we didn't have these new innovations coming, or more people adhering to the face mask regulations, the fall could be very tough. And part of the irony is that it's the communities that haven't had it badly who are going to be most at risk in the fall. And so we saw in the spring, a lot of cities were saying, well, we're not New York. And then, even as that rate was creeping up, they opened up. So, the U.S. Sadly is not taking this seriously. The fall could be tough, mostly in new places. And then, of course, we have the entire world where there's a lot of places. South America's tough today, but Africa, the numbers keep going up. Thank goodness that we have the innovation coming, because otherwise the eventual damage, would go on for over 5 years.
Yeah, and one place we need help still is testing. I mean, Quest just this week said they're actually falling behind or not catching up to that lag that you spoke of. Why is that? What can we do there quickly?
Well, it's insane. You shouldn't pay anyone for a test where you have the results that it takes longer than 48 hours. The whole point of the test is to let you know that you need to isolate yourself so you don't infect other people. Once you test positive, your days of infection are actually, unfortunately, a few days probably before you go to get tested, and then that 3 or 4 days afterwards. And so there is zero value to a delayed test. You can write an apology note to all the people you saw during that time, but the idea that we're not at the federal level outraged by the waste of money and the inequitable allocation of our testing, which is the simplest thing about this whole thing. We have more PCR machines than any country in the world. And, to get the supplies, get the prioritization, we've shown now that you can use a swab that you just put at the tip of the nose. And, we got the FDA to approve it. There's still a lot of places using that one where they, the worker who has to get exposed jams it into the back of your throat. So it's been so slow. The conversations with, CDC, they say, hey, that's up at the White House level, and then you don't have the experts there being listened to.
17 players and staff of Major League Baseball's Miami Marlins have tested positive for COVID-19 in recent days. Should the league suspend or shut down the season even?
Well, I'm not an expert on that. I'm the one area I'm really trying to make sure that the data is available has to do with the choices people make on schools. The idea that they're not going to have fans, all these sports are trying to do things in a safe way. And, I don't know what trade-offs are involved there. The worst thing about infection is if it gets to elderly people. And so anyone, if you're in a multi-generational household, or you really have to behave in a way that you're not connecting to the elderly, which is why the death rate's gone up over the last few months, because so many young people got infected and then it spread up in age.
But is it fair, do you think, that we're testing all these pro athletes while tests are so hard to come by in the rest of the country?
It shouldn't. If we would just use our testing capacity properly, that would be okay. And the testing capacity will go up. There's a lot of new machines. There's a test called the lateral flow test that some people will be coming out with. So we're working with a lot of people, including getting that swab out in the community. So you can just go to a community center or the pharmacy and get that swab and give yourself the test and then put it in the plastic bag and send it in. That avoids the delay of, getting the test sent to you or having to drive somewhere or go to the doctor's office where you might expose somebody. So the innovation on the testing side, there's a roadmap there, but it's been slow to get attention.
But what about these conspiracy theories? And you're the subject of them, that you've used this pandemic to attempt to implant tracking devices in people. Does it bother you that this stuff is out there, particularly when you're working so hard to eradicate COVID-19?
Well, certainly it looks like conspiracy theories, these lies travel faster than the truth, particularly in an age of social media. The fact that our foundation is involved in vaccines and it has to do with saving lives, that's true. They just invert it to say that somehow, we're not trying to save lives. Instead of giving money, we're trying to make money. And, it's unfortunate, particularly if it means people are reluctant to take the vaccine, if it means they don't trust this message about face masks because they think that people giving them advice are, corrupt in some way. I mean, the two most attacked people in this phase have been myself and Dr. Fauci. And, Dr. Fauci's just telling us the truth. Some days he's allowed to tell the truth. Some days he doesn't get contradicted, by his leadership. So this is a communications exercise. And so far, the U.S. doesn't get a very high grade, and that could mean that seeking out therapies or willingness to use the vaccine will make this disease last longer.
I mean, you're seeing this stuff on social media. Just this week, there's a video by people who are purportedly doctors saying that you shouldn't wear masks and suggesting you use hydroxychloroquine. And it got just tons of views on Facebook and YouTube. Should these companies be taken to task for that? I mean, should they continue, for instance, to get protection by Section 230?
Yeah, they're changing 230. I don't think people have thought through what that leads to. But
are you against that then?
Well, the idea of trying to create liability for any untrue thing, you have to decide, would you still be able to have that type of forum? In terms of this outrageous, hydroxychloroquine anti-mask thing, it spread so fast that even though eventually the social media people stopped it, it was so famous that now people are still seeking it out. And, so their ability to stop things before they become widespread, I think they probably should improve that. I don't think it's easy because it spread so quickly. I mean, that thing was fairly new, and now we have 14 million views, and you can't find it directly on those services, but everybody's sending the link around because it's still out there on the internet. And that one is, this hydroxychloroquine thing, this is nutty stuff. I mean, we're supposed to be a developed country that, uses science. Oh my God, it is really hard to believe that that's what's being retweeted.
Are you frustrated by Tony Fauci's his boss's leadership? And I think you've been reluctant to criticize President Trump by name, and why is that?
anything that encourages the executive branch to come around as opposed to, pugilistically fight back. We're all in this together. People of both parties are sick and dying and being hurt economically. So, and we have, everybody involved has made mistakes. We didn't know that masks were such a big deal. Our foundation didn't, Dr. Fauci didn't. In fact, in the early days, we wanted to save the mask capacity for the health workers. And so it's fair to say that was an honest mistake. We actually understand why hydroxychloroquine in the test tube looked effective, but the cells that were used are not the same as human cells. So that's why that got so confused, and so now, we're pursuing other things, and there's lots of good therapeutics that will work, that are coming along. And, so we want to not push away the leadership that, should enable the positive truth to get out. So just, making a fight out of it, I give Dr. Fauci a lot of credit. He just rolls with the punches and, tries to get it out. We touch base with him on a regular basis because the U.S. government, our foundation, are the two biggest funders of these new interventions. And that is the hopeful part of this whole thing, that actually that's the one thing the U.S. has been the best at. Other governments aren't funding research and development on new tools at the same way the U.S. is. Now we're encouraging them to do so, but they've been a bit slower.
Bill, Google just announced that they wouldn't be having people back to the offices until next July. Is this going to really change the way we think of office work forever, for a long time? What's your take on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about that. I am surprised that, nobody's gone into our foundation offices since early March. Microsoft's offices, which are in this huge campus, are empty. And yet for certain types of work, the productivity is not dramatically reduced. Now, I don't think we'll stay at that extreme. We want, you to meet new employees and sit and talk with each other. But, do you need to come in 5 days a week for a full day? I think people's minds have been opened about less travel, maybe less time in the office, setting your home up so you have a space that you're not interfering with the other members of the household, so you can concentrate. I think that will be quite different. How far different companies will go, is open-ended. But yes, it's now possible to do a lot of jobs remotely. A lot of those employees are going to move to some part of the country, because they know not until July are they expected to show up.
Last question, Bill. You talk to all kinds of people. Who gives you the most hope that we're going to be able to get out of this at some point? You mentioned Tony Fauci. What other people do you find inspiring or just are doing great work?
Well, the private sector companies, a lot of them have diverted their talent onto this work. And that's fantastic. A group we work with at Oxford, Adrian Hill and his team, they, are contributing to this. Trevor Mundell runs our global health stuff, and, he's just day and night, trying to accelerate the work here. It's great to see these teams coming together. And it's almost kind of a warlike situation where you think, hey, time is of an essence. Anyone we call, is likely to respond. We need your expertise on how to make antibodies quickly. We need more glass vials, for 6 billion vaccines. That all these deep capacities being used where it's not, a profit-driven thing. I'm quite impressed with that. There'll be a great story to tell. Not everybody's participating perfectly, but the private sector overall, and the boundary between academia and the private sector and the speed now It's really wonderful, and that's where we're going to get some great tools, even a few, well before the end of the year.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. All right, we're going to leave it at that. Bill Gates, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, great talking to you.
You've been watching Influencers. I'm Andy Serwer. We'll see you next time.
A pioneer of personal computing, Michael Dell launched Dell Technologies when he was just 19 years old with $1,000 in his pocket. Since then, he's revolutionized the tech industry, creating one of the most successful companies in the world while helping to put computers into millions of homes over the last 36 years. Today, Dell remains an important leader in both business and philanthropy, speaking out on issues around diversity in the workplace and raising money for pandemic relief. In this episode of Influencers, I speak with Michael Dell about the role of business in today's society and how Dell Technologies can better serve its customers after COVID-19.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Serwer, and welcome to Influencers. Welcome to our guest, Michael Dell, the Chairman and CEO of Dell Technologies. Michael, so great to see you.
Great to be with you, Andy.
So much to talk about, a lot going on. Let me start and ask you about George Floyd. And Dell released a statement condemning the killing of George Floyd and acknowledging that more work needed to be done in this country to address racial inequality. What steps is the company taking, Michael, and what about you personally?
Well, first of all, let me just say, it was a very sad thing to watch, as a man was murdered, his life was taken away, and that's not something you'll ever forget. Look, I think companies play a really big role here. When people don't feel that they have opportunities and they're left out, I think that's obviously problematic. It's also an opportunity for companies. So we have for a long time embraced diversity inside our company. Not saying we're perfect at it, but I think we've created the conditions for success. And in a bit of a silver lining, I think this has opened up the conversation in a new way, and allowed us to have even a more in-depth dialogue and understanding, and hopefully more progress. And we, I think, can lead by example in creating an inclusive culture and creating the support that our team members need. And ultimately, I'll just say I'm not real optimistic that that government forces are going to drive the change here. I think it's going to be up to companies to create the conditions and the opportunities for success for the communities that have not had them, and that's what we're trying to do.
And you have some work to do at your own company. You might acknowledge, Michael, because you don't have a tremendous number of African-American executives in the C-suite or on the board. Is this something you think you guys need to address?
Yes, and we've set pretty ambitious goals for ourselves. We every 10 years we lay out a set of ambitious goals, and we just did that. With our 2030 goals. We had our almost a decade ago, our 2020 legacy of good, and now we've laid out, a set of moonshot goals. So, our goals for 2030, 25% of our workforce will be Black and African American and Hispanic and Latino minorities. 50% of our global workforce and 40% of our people leaders will be women. We've also set big goals for our green initiative. And you and I have talked about that in the past. For every product a customer buys, we'll reuse or recycle an equivalent product. 100% of our packaging will be made from recycled and renewable materials. And we don't actually know how to do all these things, but that's sort of the point. And if I go back a decade ago when we set the 2020 goals, we didn't know how to do all of those either, but we actually achieved a significant majority of them. So, those are the aspirations that we've set for ourselves.
Right. And then just about the tech industry writ large with, say yourself and Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. It's a lot of white guys at the top, and people have criticized the business for being a white male bastion. More work to be done generally, and I think the line has been, well, there's just not enough candidates, but it's more than that, right? It's maybe not trying hard enough by the industry overall.
Yeah, I think it's multifactorial, and we've got a role to play for sure. And while there's been some progress, as you said, collectively, it's not enough. And look, I think also we can look across lots of organizations, and it's not clear that anybody has really broken through. And it remains work to be done for everyone. And I would just say, the recent incidents have kind of redoubled our resolve around the goals that we've had, and again, in a positive way, I think opened up the conversation, and hopefully that will lead to positive change for communities of color.
Switching over to coronavirus, so what impact has the coronavirus outbreak had on the tech sector? I mean, this is a big question, and how have companies responded generally? It's just sort of been a big reset, right?
Yeah, look, I think it has highlighted, first of all, how much business activity has been able to be continued during this period. I mean, if you think about the technological improvements, in networks and computing power that have occurred in the last decade or so, think how much devastation there would have been to both the economy, to education, to the social support systems that we have if we didn't have these technologies. I also think there's been an acceleration of digital transformation. What would have taken months, is now happening much faster. And I think that there's also some human impact here. I think there's some new empathy, and organizations are interacting with new ways, in new ways with all their teams. I think we got a kind of glimpse of the future, right? And we're not going to go back to the way, to the ways that we used to work. And, fortunately, our company had enabled flexible work environments starting about a decade ago. And I think, a lot of this is going to stay with us. And it just emphasizes the importance of some of the big investments that need to be made in 5G, and there's kind of companies that are digitally enabled and kind of digitally forward thinking and capable, and those are the ones that are more prepared.
How do you see the economy opening up and our society opening up? How do you think that's going to play out into the summer and into the fall and into 2021, Michael?
I think if you'd asked me a month or so ago, I would have said it's going to be slow and gradual. I guess I'm feeling a little more optimistic now, having seen some of the reopenings, and they seem to be going reasonably well. I think for many workers, if you're in a work environment where you don't have to go to the office, people aren't rushing back to the office. The interesting thing about this virus is one can assume that at the end, whatever that is, the case count is 7.4 billion. In other words, everyone will either get the virus or they will get a vaccine. And we just don't know when that is. But it's also becoming clear that, it has disparate impact on, certain populations. And so that has to be accounted for as we think about, restarting the economy. But I'm pretty encouraged with what I'm seeing about the restart. I mean, I think there are issues of and again, how do we protect the vulnerable populations? But here in Texas, for example, there has not been it has not been a horrible public health care outcome, and I think there's still kind of cautious steps being taken in the reopening.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's all become politicized to a degree, right? And
yeah, unfortunately, I think everything gets politicized. So that is sad to see.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I guess you could argue that President Trump was right in some instances, maybe wasn't right in other instances. In other words, I think that geographies are critically important. Denser places, probably required a different response from less dense places, for instance, right?
Well, we've certainly learned a lot, now here in June versus what we knew in March, right? In terms of how the virus spreads, who is most vulnerable to it, and how best to treat it, et cetera. So, and of course, the other exciting thing is we have an enormous effort going on in the healthcare system with therapeutics and monoclonal antibodies and vaccines. And so, I would never underestimate human ingenuity and progress to go out there and address this. And so, I'll remain my optimistic self.
So let's switch over to Dell a little bit, Michael. The company seems to be doing pretty well. You surprised the street in the latest quarter. Stock's up, 44% since the low point in March. What's going on?
So look, we created an incredible business with the combination of Dell and EMC and VMware and Pivotal, and Dell Technologies is doing well. We have continued to gain share in all of our major businesses, and as you said, during our first quarter, it was a very solid quarter. We beat the analyst estimates for revenue, for profit, for earnings per share. Our non-GAAP op inc was $2.2 billion, and we materially outperformed our competitors in terms of growth in every major product category. So, and that's actually not a new thing. It's been going on for a couple of years now. So customers have appreciated, the capabilities that we have, and our team executed very strongly. And look, I think our supply chain performed incredibly well. We have a distributed manufacturing and logistics network, and we were able to operate well, in spite of the challenges that were out there. Certainly, there was strong demand for things like work from home solutions, but also, we grew faster than the industry in the data center, and VMware continues to do very well in helping customers prepare their organizations for their digital futures.
And what's the split right now? Talk to us about the company in terms of public and private, or B2C and B2B is what I'm saying, I guess. What percentage of the company is B2C versus B2B, and what is the future strategy for the B2C part of the business, the consumer part of the business?
So, the B2C part is probably the part that people see the most, but it's actually the smallest part of the business. So, it's in the kind of 12, 13, 14% range of revenues, depending on the quarter. But we're mostly a B2B company. But look, we've got a strong consumer business. We've got Alienware. XPS notebooks are doing very well, and the online business is growing. Our online visits in April to DellTechnologies.com and Dell.com, we're up 77% and 28%. But the real epicenter of the company is in the data center, and with large companies building out their multi-cloud platforms and dealing with the enormous increase in the amount of data. I mean, somebody once said that data is the new oil. Well, kind of, but not exactly, in the sense that as far as I know, there's a finite amount of oil on planet Earth, but with data, it's not finite at all. In fact, it continues to increase. And the real challenge of our time for companies is to figure out, and all organizations, governments, et cetera, is how do we use all this data to improve whatever it is we're trying to do, right? And with more everything in the world becoming intelligent and connected, with the 5G coming around the corner, and then you have AI and machine learning, all these technologies come together to create an incredible opportunity for organizations, and that requires lots of new capabilities, infrastructure, and that's really what Dell Technologies provides.
Yeah, so you're telling me, Michael, that, hey, Dell's a cloud company, which is a pretty hot space to be in, and it's a good place to be in. So can you explain a little bit more, though, exactly what you're selling and providing for companies then? I mean, what is the actual business for in layman's terms?
Yeah, so if you think about some of our customers, if you went down the list of the 25 biggest banks in the world, they're pretty much all our customers. And so, how is it? What is it that a bank does? Well, one of the things it does is it has incredible amounts of data. It has to secure it. It has to process that. And how does it do that? Well, it requires applications. It requires infrastructure. One of the big themes is how do you automate all of that so you don't have lots of people running around, and technologies like virtualization and are incredibly important there. So we are really the essential infrastructure company with hardware and software that enables companies to build that infrastructure that is the platform for how they deliver their businesses. And look, I think the other interesting thing that's occurred in the last, I would say, 5 years or so is that the domain of technology has really changed. It used to be that technology was in the IT department, right? But now, if you go to almost any company, you say, what is the role of technology? Well, it's really involved in the entire business. And, the business line executives, the chief executive are all thinking about technology and data and how they can use data to make their product and service better. And of course, they need infrastructure to be able to do that. So we're number one in all the major categories of hardware, software, infrastructure, cloud infrastructure to help organizations, as they build out their digital future.
So who are your biggest competitors then? Is it AWS, Google? How does that work?
Yeah, our industry is sort of characterized, as by a kind of co-opetition. So one of the things that organizations have realized is that it's not really the public cloud or the private cloud. It's both, right? And so you hear terms like private, like hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. And what organizations have figured out is it's really dependent on the workload. And certain workloads you might use a software as a service provider. Some you might have on premise. Some you might have in a public cloud. Some you might have with a colo. Some you might have on the edge, which is starting to grow quite fast. And you want to move them all around and back and forth. And depending on the type of workload, there's going to be a right place for it. And so we collaborate and compete with lots of companies in the industry, but we're also fortunate to be serving essentially all the Fortune 500.
And what is the vision for the initiative about?
So that is really about how we can use our business to drive social impact. And we've set some moonshot goals for the next decade. You can find them on our website, but they're around diversity and inclusion. They're around environmental sustainability. These are not really new things for us. As from our prior conversations, we have always kind of set a pretty high standard for ourselves, and so we're doing it again with these goals. And it challenges our people to think differently. And as it relates to the environment, look, it's easy to say, well, what are the rules? We'll comply with those, right? But the rule makers are sort of dealing with the rearview mirror, and instead we like to take a proactive approach and say, well, what's really possible here, and how can we reimagine what we're doing, and at the same time, have a very positive impact on the environment and bring our customers increased savings. And what we found time and time again is our engineers, we've got 20,000 engineers and scientists, actually become quite motivated and inspired by the challenge to be able to work on these things. And so, I think maybe at one point it was a nice thing to do. I think it's no longer the case that it's really required for a responsible business to do these things.
Let's switch and talk a little bit about philanthropy. You've set up the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, given $1.7 billion over the years. What have you focused on?
Really focused on children in urban poverty, and that really gets into education, healthcare, economic stability, and opportunities. And that's been the primary data-driven approach, a results-driven approach, and there you go. That's been our area of focus.
$100 million for coronavirus relief. What have you done there specifically, Michael?
Yeah, so as we saw the effects of COVID-19, it was becoming clear to us that the economic fallout from the virus was pretty significant to the communities that our foundation has served for decades now. And so we did dedicate $100 million specifically to this, $20 million to the therapeutics accelerator that was launched by the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and MasterCard to help identify and accelerate the development of therapeutics and vaccines. The other $80 million is around supporting the healthcare systems and increased medical capacity, helping to sustain the vital work that our nonprofit partners and social enterprises provide at a time when their efforts will be needed even more. We're focused on the education system and helping schools adapt as they deal with this and look forward to the new school year ahead. And finally, initiatives around stabilizing small businesses, micro entrepreneurs, and gig workers whose livelihoods are important to our communities in the overall economy. And one of the things we did here in Texas, there's no longer a PPE shortage, and one of our Dell supply chain executives took a leave of absence, went to go work for the state of Texas. The state, and he immediately helped the state, procure a bunch of PPE. But he ran into a problem, and that was that a lot of the suppliers wouldn't accept the state's terms of business. And so anyway, our foundation set up a mechanism that put the risk on the foundation and help the state make sure it had access to the right quantity of PPE and avoided problems there.
Coronavirus could exacerbate the economic divide between the haves and have-nots in our society in terms of education, just in terms of Wi-Fi and virtual education, right? Is that something that concerns you?
It is. I mean, I think there is a kind of digital inequality that we have to all think about, in the sense that, if there are populations that don't have access to the digital opportunities and the tools and the capabilities, it's going to be a lot harder, and as not just here in the United States, but obviously around the world. It's a big challenge.
And last question, Michael, you and I have known each other for a number of decades now. And so I'm wondering if you've considered much the narrative arc of your career. You were this wunderkind with this PC startup, grew like crazy, growth slowed, the private period, then coming back and, had a renaissance, not unlike Apple maybe even, but because maybe it's more B2B, it's a little bit less visible to the public. And, I would imagine you don't consider yourself done by any means. So what does this all mean to Michael Dell?
Well, first of all, I feel very fortunate and grateful to have had the opportunities I've had. As you said, I've kind of had many lives. Starting out in my dorm room at the University of Texas, which I can actually see out the window here, and starting a business. Growing it to be $92 billion business, being involved in philanthropy, being an investor, buying back my company, taking it public again, setting up an investment firm and a foundation. So look, it's been a lot of fun, and it continues to be fun. And as you said, I'm 55, so still got lots of fun ahead. And look, I continue to be an optimist about the positive role that technology plays in our future, even as there are forces out there that would seek to create division and controversy and strife. I continue to be optimistic that technology will play a great and positive role in our future, and our company has been fortunate to be able to help many with that over the last 36 years, and look forward to doing that for a long time to come.
Yes, indeed. Much more to come from Michael Dell. Michael Dell, CEO of Dell Technologies. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Andy.
You've been watching Influencers. This is Andy Serwer. We'll see you next time.